You guys are all ready? All good? And there's water on each side for you guys too if you want water bottles. We're going to get started. We're right on time today. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm wearing some of my home clothing, I guess you would call it, because people don't like to call it regalia or costumes. But I ain't going to wear this afternoon because I'm already very, very hot. This is made out of moose skin. And so, like I said yesterday, if you look at some the First Nations from the Yukon, you'll see that they have animals on lots of their clothing. And so this is a representation of my coastal roots of Alaska. So there's an eagle on there. And so I'll introduce myself again. Datlawedi Iche, Tlingetke, Dunke, Agunda Iche, the wolf. And ing Luke Campbell Yeche Guchanke Aju Dunke and Shadal Quetzan Iche Shadal Hu Ninje and Quechal Quechan Iche. I am a person of the Flatlands, which is where I live in beautiful Shadal. So we have a lot that we're going to be doing today. And I hope you guys weren't up too late last night. I heard it went very late here till about midnight, so you guys might be tired. We have a full day ahead of us, as well as the opening ceremonies of the Adakon Festival happening later today. So some housekeeping things. It is encouraged that you wear your mask around large groups of people. It is not required in the Yukon anymore. And if you have any COVID-like symptoms, you can let Aaron or Marion know. And if you need COVID tests, if you are asymptomatic, you can pick some up at any of the pharmacies in Whitehorse. Or if you have symptoms, you can go to your hotel and ask for a test kit from your hotel. If you're not aware, there's washrooms outside here to the left of the registration desk. There are washrooms for men and women, and there's also gender-neutral washrooms if you go to the right, past the kitchen with the big black screens on it, and go to the left. There's a gender-neutral washroom that's also wheelchair accessible, and then a men's washroom right there, and further down there's the women's washroom. At 10 o'clock, the gallery for the Adakon Festival is also opening, so at break time, I would like to encourage you guys to go and check that out because there's lots of amazing things in there. I got a sneak peek. Somebody opened the door this morning and I peeked in and she slammed the door really fast. Wasn't allowed to look in there. So I wanted to let you guys also know that there's 12 spaces left for Theater in the Bush. There's more information on it in your pamphlet. So Theater in the Bush is an outdoor theater production. Over 2,000 people have already seen the production already. If you go, be prepared to be in the beautiful heat. And the mosquitoes in the Yukon, when you leave the city of Whitehorse, they are crazy horrible. So if you're going to go to Theater in the Bush, you are rather going to be hot and wear long and cover your entire body than get eaten by mosquitoes. Trust me, I live outside of Whitehorse and I never wear shorts, I never wear t-shirts. I only do in Whitehorse because there's mosquito control here. And I'm sure you guys probably know about mosquitoes living in the Circumpolar North, right? They're bad. They're really bad. So if you go to Theater in the Bush, cover up. And you know what? If you wear moose skin, they can't sting through your moose skin, but you'll be roasting. So Theater in the Bush, there's 12 spots. And it's outside of Whitehorse. It's on a beautiful, it's the person who put the production together. It's on his property. And be prepared for a really fun night of theater. Also, if you are on the early morning flight leaving Whitehorse, if you're on the early morning flight, that might mean you did not fly on Air North, Yukon's airline. If you're on the early morning flight, get up early and be prepared. If you're traveling on Air Canada, because there's been some crazy, horrible experiences traveling with Air Canada, be prepared for tomorrow morning if you're leaving early. So if you're leaving early, there are shuttles going to the airport. You need to email the AAS 2022 email and let them know your flight information, your flight times, and what hotel you're at. So they cannot promise that you will get a shuttle. You need to let them know by 5 p.m. tonight so that the coordinators can figure all of the pickup and drop-off times for people who are leaving very early. So if you need that information again, it's the AAS 2022 email, and email them by 5 p.m. today so that you're guaranteed a spot on the shuttle. And I would also like to say, Daga Shoning Van Ta'an Kwachan Ye Kwanlin Dan Kwa Nan Keika in Klashe Jalak Anzanu. And this is the beautiful building of the Kwanlin First Nation, and we are also on the traditional territory of the Ta'an Kwachan, and without them, we would not be able to meet today. There are health breaks happening throughout the afternoon, so all the food, as you can see, is going to be brought over here as well. It is catered by Inn on the Lake. The food yesterday was amazing, right? Were you guys full? That was a lot of food, right? Right? It was a lot of food. It was good. And so I'm going to now pass over the mic to our first panelists. So the first session we're going to have today is In Our Hands, Decolonizing Access to Funding for Circumpolar Artists. Funding is very critical to supporting artistic practices across disciplines. And I'd like you guys to sit back and relax and join representatives from public funders across the Circumpolar North as they discuss ways in which their institutions are working to decolonize their application and assessment process to make access equitable for artists in the Arctic. And I'd like to introduce our first moderator, Matthias Danbolt. Matthias Danbolt. So, a round of applause for our moderator.
Thank you so much, and welcome to this first session of the last day of the Arctic Art Summit. As you heard, the title of today is In Our Hands, Decolonizing Access for Funding for Circumpolar Artists. And the panel kind of follow-ups some of the discussion that we had here last night at the final panel that was about decolonizing arts institutions. So my name is Matthias Danbolt, and I'm a professor of art history at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And I guess I'm sitting here also as because I have had experience quite recently for sitting 4 years on an assessment committee at the Arts Council Norway. And it's a great privilege and great pleasure to be on this panel and share this panel today, because we have some really stellar people who have a lot of responsibilities in their hands to do some work on these issues. I will not going to read long bios because we have 50 minutes to fix a lot of things. So I'll just briefly start by introducing so you know who are here. So here to my left, far left, is Maria Utsi, who you have met several times already. But Maria Utsi is here now in the role as the Deputy Chair of Arts Council Norway and also Chair of the Expert Committee for Multi-Disciplinary Practices. Beside Maria is Veronica Lampa Lönnbro, who's Deputy Director General of the Swedish Arts Council and head of the department that distributes funding aimed at regional developments and grants to the independent cultural sector. Sorry. And closest to me here is Anakulu Juklais, who is a board member of the fairly new Greenland Art Fund. And for the last 4 years, she's also been the CEO of Katuak in Nuuk, the Greenland Cultural House. To my right is Henri Tero, who is head of art support at the Arts Promotion Center Finland, or Taike. And he's responsible for the grant and funding schemes there. And he's also the chair of the Finnish State Art Commission. And the final speaker today is Odile Jonette, who is the director of the Creating, Knowing and Sharing, the Arts and Cultures of First Nation, Inuit and Métis Peoples Program at the Canada Council for the Arts. So as you can hear, we have people here representing some of the most kind of powerful institutions that are working with distributing funding for artists. And the plan for today is that we will start by giving each of the panelists an opportunity to just situate their practice briefly. I know some of you might know some arts councils better than others, but all of these arts councils are quite different and working in different contexts and having different challenges. So I've asked the panelists to do a brief start introduction to kind of situate where they are, so we can further on kind of clarify what kind of colonial contexts we are dealing with and what kind of decolonizing practices it will we are able to start implementing. So I will actually just pass the word over to you, Maria. Maybe you could start.
Thank you, Matthias. So good to be here. The Norwegian Arts Council was established in 1965. And I was appointed in 2015 as the first Sami representative of the council ever. So it took 50 years to get there. It's an organ that consists of two bodies. One is an arm's length organ, the council, and the Arts Council itself is governed by a council consisting of 10 people representing the whole country, and we have 13 assessment committees or expert committees that are assessing applications from the different applicants in different disciplines. The other organ, the other branch of the Arts Council is the Directorate. It's not an arm's length organ. It's working under the Ministry of Culture, but they're also the Secretariat for the Council and all the Council's expert committees. We assess around 8,500 applications every year, and the Council has organized its programs within the framework of different disciplines. So you have dance, you have theater, you have music, and so on and so forth. And then you have the committee that I'm the chair of, which is a committee for multidisciplinary practices. There is an ongoing discourse in the Norwegian Arts Council and the Norwegian arts and culture field on diversity, but there is no existing discourse on decolonizing or decolonization. That is not a word that is being used in Scandinavia, I would say. More and more within the Sami communities and the Sami societies and the Sami arts and culture field, but I don't know if I will live to hear a Norwegian Arts Council director use the word decolonization. So it's quite hard to decolonize a structure or an organ if the discourse on decolonization doesn't exist, and if you're not acknowledging that we are a colonizing national state, and that the Sami people has been colonized. So I think that's the first and foremost struggle and challenge for Norwegian Arts Council right now.
Thank you so much, Maria. We will get back to that, I think. Veronica, do you want to quickly, briefly introduce the Swedish Arts Council?
Yes. The Swedish Arts Council was established in 1994. I took notes when you said when the Norwegian Arts Council was established. So 1974, the Arts Council is led by a board that is assigned by the ministry. And we allocate funding to all art forms except film, because we have another agency for that. Half of our budget goes directly to the regions for regional development. The rest of the budget goes to the independent sector. And those grants are assessed by various assessment groups, assessment committees. Half of them are advisory and half of them take the decisions. And the core missions for the Arts Council follows the national cultural policy objectives, and they are, and this is my interpretation of them because they're written quite more lengthy, but the freedom of expression, the freedom of artistic practices, accessibility to art for all, and third, that art should have an impact on society. And that's also the framework within all our assignments and tasks are based upon. And if we go to the context of where we are right now, I would say that the pandemic is something that we can't ignore. The pandemic had a huge impact on Swedish culture. However, the government allocated huge amounts of funding to save, I would say, the cultural sector. They doubled our budget, and we have been able to save, especially the independent sector. Right now, the question is, will the audience, the old one and new people, find their way back to arts and culture? What benefits have we seen during the pandemic? Because we do know that we work with digital ways of expressing ourselves, of reaching people. What happens there? And we also see that during the pandemic, there has been time for artistic development, collaborations. So it's both good and bad, but the pandemic has had a huge impact. And I agree with you. The question about decolonization is not something that is spoken of in Sweden politically or within the authority. However, within the Sami people, it's a question, of course. So that's the same as Norway. The question that's been the buzzword in Sweden for, I would say, the last 2 or 3 years has been artistic freedom, and how we can secure and safeguard the artistic freedom in all aspects, and whether there's a conflict to accessibility or not. So I would say that's where we are.
Thank you so much. Anna Kuluk.
Thank you. My name is Anna Kuluk. I'm from Greenland, so a very big island, a very small population. We are 57,000, so it's a big delegation we have here at Arctic Art Summit. I am a member of the new Greenland Art Fund, which started 5 months ago, so that's quite new. And well, it's actually, the money has been given for artists and art for many years, but it's the reason why this was created was that they wanted there was a wish to create more arm's length, like Maria was saying, from the Department of Culture. So before we started 1st of January this year, but before that, it was the Department of Culture who got the applications, and they decided who should get the money. So now we have a board. We are 5 people sitting in the board, and we give money to artists, artistic projects applied for by people who live in Greenland. So that's like, yeah. Important for us that it's artists living in Greenland, because it's we don't have like a lot of money to get for artists, and I can say that we have almost 1.5 Canadian million to give in 1 year, so that's quite a difference, I know, compared to the other ones here. But it's still very important for artists, and we just started working right now. We're still building the board, like finding out how should we do this. In the beginning, of course, it was important just to, okay, we need to find out how we can ensure that we can give artists money like right away. We started 1st of January, and the next deadline for application was very close. So it's been very practical in the beginning, I must say. But our aim is, or the reason why I said this was made was to create an arm's length and to have some people to assess the applications and people who work with art themselves. And the people who are in the board that I am in are all artists also, except for one, and that's me. So, but we all work in culture and art, and that was when they made the board. They wanted people who were already working closely with artists. So, yeah, I think I'll start there. Yeah.
Thank you, but it's just important to kind of set the stage a bit, because the conditions are so radically different, and I think that's helpful when we get into the challenging parts in a minute. So, Henry.
Good, my turn. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation to attend this panel. As said, my name is Henri Terho. I'm representing here Finnish Arts Council, or its proper name being Arts Promotion Center of Finland. Our present organization was established 10 years ago. We're actually having an anniversary later this year. But the system is founded in late 1960s, so I think we are having rather similar kind of tradition than the ones in Norway and in Sweden, a bit different from the one in Greenland, it sounds like. The essential points for this discussion, if I'm trying to briefly describe the system that we have in Finland, is that we have 20 different councils dealing with artists' applications. And out of the 20, 13 of those are regional councils, and 7 of those are art-based councils. The regional councils are formed in a way that naturally the Regional Council of Lapland has also responsibility to support Sami artists living in Lapland, which is of course there a major issue that has to be taken into account naturally in the decision making. In the 20 councils, we have roughly 200 plus something members, and almost all of the members are artists, so the peer review process is dependent on ones having artists working in the councils. And actually for this event, I checked the list of all the members of all the councils, and currently we have 3 members out of 200 that are Sami of origin. And that has roughly been the case throughout the system. So we have had kind of idea that there has to be representation from various kinds of groups working in Finland, so that there's a kind of balance when it comes to making assessment for the artists. And I'm kind of honored here to say that we have had also Sami-born artists working as the chairs of the councils. Some of you might know a video media artist called Maria Helander. She used to be the chair of Interdisciplinary Arts Council back some years ago, and she's also currently a member of Finnish State Art Commission. So we have had experiences from within, working people from within the Sami community in Finland. Out of the catchwords or buzzwords that are kind of relevant for this discussion, I can continue what Maria and Veronica were saying, that no, we are not either speaking of decolonization when it comes to art funding. And naturally Finland tends to be a bit proud of not ever being a colonizing country, but we know that that's not quite true. But that is something that when we are comparing our history with the histories of major European countries, we tend to have a different kind of attitude towards being colonial, because I would say that we never were rich enough or powerful enough to get a colony. I think Finns also wanted one, but never got one. So idea of colonization is maybe a bit different from Finnish perspective. Maybe decolonization is also a bit different from Finnish perspective, but naturally we cannot avoid of recognizing our responsibilities in terms of decolonization. And quite interestingly, when I'm thinking of the more recent debates concerning decolonization in Finland, that has a lot to do with Karelian traditions in Finland. And that has been one of the biggest debates in terms of art policies in Finland during last year, actually. Because Finnish cultural traditions derive a lot from Karelian regions bordering Russia, and even our national epos called Kalevala is actually Karelian tradition that has been imported to Finland, and that has aroused a lot of discussions that are kind of evolving around decolonization. Other buzzwords that we are kind of current interest are, of course, diversity in terms of arts, ideas of inclusion of artists from different backgrounds, and maybe one of the most current debates is about language. Our problem when it comes to our structures is that our organization is almost solely dependent on Finnish language, which means that we have various groups that kind of are looking for funding from us that are in a bit shaky position because they don't have Finnish as their first language, and there are barriers that they have to fight because of that. And that is something that we naturally are trying to do our best to kind of overcome and make a better future for that. Maybe this shortly.
Great. Language is definitely something we will return to in a second because there's so much to speak about concerning that. But Odile.
Kwai. Greetings, everybody, all my relatives. My name is Odile. I belong to the lands we call Nitassinan. My family, Pikotligan, were responsible for a large portion of the territory from the Innu Nation. I'm really, really honored and pleased and feel so privileged to be with you today and to also be part of the Canada Council for the Arts. Because at Canada Council for the Arts, that was created early 1950s, Canada Council recognizes they are a colonial organization, Crown Corporation, acknowledges and has been blunt in recognizing the responsibility in the decolonizing journey. I'm responsible for the program that supports Indigenous arts. At Canada Council, back in 2021, we spent almost $320 million in granting for the arts, out of which 7.4 million went to Indigenous creators and organizations. So the commitments of Canada Council are important and great in terms of engaging in that conversation, provoking those difficult discussions, both internally and with the sector. I never thought I'd work for a Crown Corporation. I have always worked for Indigenous-led sovereign infrastructure, but Canada Council is inspiring to me. Jessie Wente being the chair, first Indigenous chair of a Crown Corporation, that for me is amazing. Simon and the strat plan that was created by the team is absolutely amazing in terms of the bluntness and the commitments towards self-determination, cultural appropriation. There has been a lot of public commitments by the Canada Council. So conversations are really in the decolonizing journey. And I think we acknowledge at Canada Council that there are kind of two sets of journeys in the decolonization. One that will be good for all increased accessibility, the barriers to access the funding. And those barriers have been identified and mentioned by the Indigenous peoples, but they have always also been identified and mentioned by a lot of different marginalized population and excluded voices. So that will be one that will serve the openness of bringing in new voices and new talents. But there's another decolonizing journey that is also a commitment from Canada Council, and it is the one towards self-determination. And that's a different set of objectives and a different set of transitions to understand that self-determination means that getting out of the way, allowing, giving the powers to the Indigenous peoples themselves to determine their priority, their criteria. And that is also something that Canada Council is committed to and understands that it's a journey. Because Canada has done it in other sectors. They have transferred authorities to Indigenous peoples in other sectors. I'll give the example of employment. But they have done it with limited resources, limited human, limited capacity. So they're setting them up for failure. I strongly want to work alongside the Canada Council team to make sure that we're doing this correctly and that we're making sure that we're accompanying Indigenous peoples in the way they want to do it and with the resources they need to make sure that it is done in a correct way. So yes, I feel privileged alongside all of you that you know, the decolonization is something that has to be discussed, has to be mentioned. In Canada, we've had so many conversations and reports, and so we know what has to be done. We are now at the space where we need to put in action some of those recommendations that have been written, discussed, mentioned. So it's time to move into more of an action-based agenda.
Thank you, and let's get to action then. Because of course, I think we are in a, you know, as you see, the panel are diverse in the sense that for some, just even introducing the concept of colonial history, coloniality of the present, and that these institutions are colonial in different ways. That just that is a hard conversation to start with. And one thing is, of course, the kind of colonial histories. I would argue that both Sweden and Denmark or Norway and Finland are settler colonial states, and that's not even something we need to discuss. So of course that is a colonial context already, but another aspect is of course the coloniality of art. The concept of art comes out of a specific Western tradition that makes, when we get to the kind of gist of it, of peer assessment, the concepts we are looking at and supporting in itself, if we understand them as having colonial repercussions, we also kind of need to question not only the institutions, but also the words we are using. As Canada Council for the Arts, I've read some of the reports and some of the material where it's very clearly argued in a way, one, that arts councils traditionally have worked as assimilation tools, that artists need to assimilate in order to become recognizable. And I think Jesse Wente has also been promoting that, or been very clear about that. And also that the peer assessment processes come out of structures and histories that are kind of colonial and ableist and patriarchal and just deeply problematic. So we need to get into practice. What are we able to do? Because one thing is ideology and good words. Another thing is how does that materialize in everyday processes when you sit there with peer assessment. So let's try to get into that. You, Odile, you have worked quite extensively on changing these kind of structures. Do you want to say just a bit more about how specific peer assessment processes in an Indigenous perspectives, how that work at your council?
Well, at Canada Council, all of Indigenous arts is managed by Indigenous people. So all of the crew in creating, knowing, and sharing is Indigenous. So all of the assessment is done by Indigenous peoples. So that's like the first, I think, rule is you could only be, only Indigenous people can assess Indigenous projects. But there's still a challenge for Canada because we have so many different nations and so many different communities. In Canada, we're over 600 communities, 70 Indigenous languages, worldviews. So it's still a challenge to try to get the best representation around the table to assess a variety of projects. The other thing that I think is extremely important is deconstructing all of the disciplines. Art for Indigenous people is our way of life. It's our way of being. It's our way of expressing our cultures in different ways. And reducing all of the barriers about discipline and trying to get them to fit in those boxes, that was a major shift with the new funding model back in 2017, is really abolishing the disciplines and allowing everybody to present their projects in the way they want to without trying to fit in a description of a discipline. And especially those disciplines were very Euro-centered, Euro-based. The other thing we have at the Creating, Knowing, and Sharing program is that we recognize individuals, organizations, group or collectives, and in the organizations we even recognize for-profit organizations because we acknowledge that in communities certain organizations are for-profit to survive and thrive and to allow to give opportunity to the artists. So I think and one profile or one kind of that I feel is really, really important is one that we call the cultural carriers. So it's just to make sure that we send out a clear message that whatever cultural expression or creation and knowledge that you have, it is admissible to Canada Council's funding. So cultural carrier means that we're trying to deconstruct and decolonize the notion of an excellent journey to be able to access funding. What is that journey? A cultural carrier is somebody that holds knowledge of cultural practice, be it contemporary or traditional. That's not us to determine. So I think it's a question of putting ourselves in a humble position of who are we to dictate or, inform. I think it's all about being designed by Indigenous people and making sure that we stay as open as we can in those criterias. So cultural carrier is one that I'm really proud of, and I'm always so happy to see more and more cultural carriers coming to Canada Council and accessing fund for their practices and land-based activities. And trying to, acknowledging as an Indigenous staff and crew and the Indigenous peer assessors know the lack of infrastructure we have in our communities. So it's really important that we look at the value of the projects with the impact, with the knowledge of the community. We've been struggling a lot, and I've seen it, how artists are being evaluated by how many times they've showcased their practice, or what was the number of the audience, the box office in the film industry, for example. That is crazy. I value Indigenous audiences, but they're not accounted in any of the data capture. Indigenous audiences that are seeing and in community-based infrastructure, be it the school, be it the community center, the small little community center, even the youth center, is spaces of sharing and gathering and presenting our art, our talent, and our community. And that has to be captured as a journey for our artists to feel empowered and meet each other. So that's part of things that I think are really important at Canada Council and that are making a change.
The question of disciplines, though, because all of you have introduced your foundations that are very discipline-based, that have expert committees related to disciplines and disciplinary knowledges and assessment committees. How do you see the disciplinary organization, the silo thinking in relation to this? Maria, do you want to?
Sure, and first of all, I just actually want to clarify something because it's important. We're being recorded and everything, so because I just want to clarify that I don't work for the Norwegian Arts Council. I'm appointed, so I'm autonomous in my role, and needless to say, I'm a rebel in that system. So it's like nothing I say is like actually, the policies of the Arts Council in Norway. So just to clarify that. Concerning the silos, the boxes, the disciplines boxes, that's a huge, I would say that's from an Indigenous perspective, from a Sami perspective, it's a huge problem. And it's a very, of course, Western way to see art and to define art. Eurocentric in every sense, and highly problematic. And the committee that I'm the chair of, the Multi-Disciplinary committee, is like the only committee that assesses applications that are not kind of placed in any of these boxes. But we are not allowed to assess any actual projects, like artistic projects, because they are to be assessed by the experts of the different disciplines. So we only assess arenas and like larger groups and collectives, but never like actual artistic projects, because then you need actual artistic excellent expertise that you will find in the different other committees. So the whole structuring is kind of made to privilege those who can define themselves in one of the boxes. So obviously, one of the most important kind of measures to colonize the Norwegian Arts Council would be to take away the boxes and the disciplines and just open for applications that expresses any kind of projects and any kind of perspectives, and then it's like up to the Arts Council to kind of assess it in a proper way. So I would say this is a core issue, and I think also I've never stopped being kind of fascinated by the fact that it has been like this since 1965. I mean, we haven't changed that system or that structure in not 50 but 60 years. So this is a huge issue, and I don't think we will see any like major changes in that kind of structuring of the assessment process in the coming years, even though I'm like screaming about it.
Henry, and then.
All right. the system of assessing applications is very complex. That's kind of starting point for all these kinds of discussions, for example, in terms of art forms, that how do they relate in the topics that we have today. And there are so many things that are actually done in a way because of the databases are working in some ways or another. And I am kind of, I have a soul of an engineer, and I have been rather pessimistic about the way in which databases are governing the ways that we are using or we have to use art forms as a category. But I think we are approaching a period when that can be solved otherwise. And I have lots of faith, for example, things like artificial intelligence making the kind of pre-groupings of applications for kind of groups that can be assessed from some other point of view apart from the art form. We simply need to have some kinds of ways of grouping applications in order to make it possible, but we haven't yet found a kind of alternative for art forms, but we might be soon in that phase. We have some private foundations in Finland who are doing it the other way around, and they are asking the applicants that what is the group that they would like to be assessed in. And those have been interesting examples and experiences, but to my understanding, those have actually produced other shortcomings for the systems. And they might have actually been causing some other chaos for the evaluation processes. So those have not been easy either in that sense. But one thing is, I actually nodded Matthias' shoulder to give a word in this phase. Important point is that is something that we actually learned from the COVID period. We in Finland, we were dealing with 45,000 COVID grant applications. And that was 3 times as much as we are dealing regularly in our system. But what was a major finding in that round was that we got a lot of new applicants for the system, and majority of those were either musicians who prior were not in need of applying for a grant, or people who hadn't found their way in our system beforehand. And we have a box called Multi-Disciplinary Art, as I think all others have as well, and they all were just about labeling themselves as multidisciplinary artists because they didn't know the other way around. And that has given us a lot to think about what is that as a group, and how that could be dealt with in assessing as a group, because naturally we have to compare applicants towards each others, but there are very few things that are uniting people that now entered the multidisciplinary art section, and we have simply thousands of applicants that don't fit into categories. And that's something that I would say that we are struggling to find another way out. And I'm very keen on learning about Canadian experiences or Scandinavian fellows' experiences, that how that can be solved.
Just before I give the word, one follow-up question. So you mentioned in the start about language then, because now if you have 45,000, like such an increase of applications, and you talk about that the digital infrastructure in itself can work as a blockage of things. I saw that on the homepage also, you can access it in Finnish and English, but not, for instance, in Sami. Are there other, have you then also, after COVID, started to work with these algorithms and trying to create other ways? Or what have you learned concerning accessibility in that?
We are in a tricky position of being a governmental organization, which means that we are dependent on governmental systems and structures in terms of databases and user interfaces, etc. But we are actually at the moment in a process of making new digitalized application system that is going to work throughout the whole governmental system of state subsidies. But those are they are 2 monolithic and large projects, and we are currently in a fear that will be again delayed in getting ready. And we are hoping to get another interface in late 2023, which might, for example, solve some problems concerning the language. But we are having our fingers crossed that the timetables will hold.
Veronica, you also had.
Yeah, when it comes to assessing applications. First of all, I want to clarify something too. We are not the only agency in Sweden. We have the Swedish Arts Grants Committee that allocates scholarships to artists, and when it comes to Sami culture, we have the Sami Parliament that also allocates funding to Sami cultural organizations. I think that's important here. Right now, the Swedish Arts Council is in the middle of a process. We are reviewing our independent grants, or the grants to the independent sector. We can see that it is necessary. The arts community changes. They don't fit in the boxes, like everybody else has said. And it's necessary for us to change in order to better give support where it's needed. We have done a first review, but we're not finished. So this is I would say a time-consuming job that we will have to do. But I am convinced, in contrast to you, that we will be able to do something within the next couple of years. With that said, today we allocate funding within the boxes. Artists, or rather organizations, can apply for grants for dance, theater, music, visual arts, and so on. We have assessment committees, and they consist of experts from the fields. They are of various ages. They come from all over Sweden, represent different areas of the field they are assessing. I would say we don't have that many Sami experts in those groups. Neither do we have experts from the other minorities, but they are a few. When they work, however, they do relational assessments, because quality and artistic quality is not a fact. It's something that changes, and it is absolutely necessary to always relate it to the arts field, to the artists, and the development. So they have a reflective process, and together they decide here and now what quality is. And potential for respective field is necessary, and also the impact to develop the art field. So that's something that they always bring to the table in the assessment process. Half of them, as I said before, are advisory, and half take the decisions.
Yeah, just one question, because I'm just so curious about the expert, because isn't it a problem with the idea of an expert as well? A lot of the experts, at least from my experience in the Norwegian Arts Council, those that are constituted as experts, a lot of us have had the same training in art school. Like, in order to be recognized as an expert, you need to have studied either in art school to become an artist, or to have been, as I was on an expert panel as an art historian and curator, right? So even though we might have some kind of minority alibi figures in there, but all of either for them to be there, they need to go through a certain kind of so don't we need to rethink what an expert is?
Oh,
as well?
but yes. Yes, and I would say that's part of the work we are going to do, because not only are we going to look at the grants, we are also going to look at the assignments for these assessment groups. However, in order to be part of a group, you apply yourself on the website. We don't find them ourselves, they apply. On the other hand, the problem is, do they know that they can apply? So, I mean, of course I understand that we have a lot to do here, but yes, and we are looking into it.
That's good. Anuk, look, you are such a new fund. How have you been building up in terms of kind of concepts of art and aesthetics and the assessment processes?
Well, we have been made, the art fund is made by the Greenlandic government. We have a parliament in Greenland, we have ministers and the Department of Culture. So it's very new to us even to have assessment of these applications to have these experts. And when this is very interesting in so many ways, because like having a professional education when it comes to culture is so new to us. So most of the people who work in our artists do not have an education, like formal European, whatever, education. So we have very few, and we're very proud of that. We have some people who are actually studying that. So, you know, it's Europe and Scandinavia have a long tradition of education, universities and everything. It's very new to us. And most of our artists and most of our dear artists that we really respect and who have been there for a lot of years, yeah, it's not because of their educational background. But so when these applications, now we just, well, yeah, we're 5 months into this, so we are like starting to ask questions. In the beginning, as I said, it was just, okay, how do we make some kind of a structure so that we can, you know, the artists rely on the money that they get to get the projects, and we are all very close to the artists. And that's why that was important for us to just get started. And then now our plan was that, well, we need to talk about this with the Artist Association, you know, to hear, okay, we have done it, this has been done like this for a lot of years, what do you think? What are the, like, barriers, and how can we do this in a different way? And I would say with the different, like, artistic categories and everything, I think for the board and also for the one who are assessing the applications, it's the knowledge of the artist and what they do, because we are such a small community and we know each other, and sometimes it's actually the other issue of being too close. How can you make sure that when it's an application from your family member, from your neighbor, that, yeah, things don't get too messy or whatever. So for us, what we're saying about the discipline is that when we sit at the board and these are being assessed, there is a lot of history. It's not like we see a name and we never met that person before. That's really rare, or we haven't heard about them, we haven't seen their art. We know a lot of people that way. But I would say, by now, 5 months into the work, and we're very new, our ambition is to talk with the people who are, like, the Artist Association. This is the, like, first ambition of talking to the people who are actually applying and who are living as artists, and say, what do you think? How should we do? And then starting from there, really. Because we can see, as there are so many subjects in that report you were saying, you sent us, that are interesting, and I think feedback is very important. Like, one of the themes in that report is feedback, and it's really important, and we also do that. Like, when we look at something and we say, well, we're not sure about how will they solve this or this and that, and we tell them, like, it's important for the artists to also, or we try, and that's also something we want to work more with. I think feedback is very important. Also that they get that, but also sometimes you contact them and you're like, can we ask the artist, there's a missing link. It's probably something, but sometimes the artist just doesn't think in that manner, so we have to find out, have to be curious. So being curious, giving feedback is something I think that we should use more in our way of working. And another thing I was gonna say in the beginning, and I was thinking when everyone is going through, you know, it's like, it would be interesting to have Denmark sitting here and hearing what they would say. But I can imagine that it's very much the same thought, and they haven't thought about the decolonizing issue, and it's really difficult for them also in many ways, because we are not like, we are sitting, I am in the Greenlandic Art Foundation, and we are for the Greenlandic population of this. But what is Copenhagen thinking? I think Copenhagen is quite nervous during this time for many reasons. There are so many awful stories in the news, you know, not because we didn't know, but still now the world also knows. So there is so many things to handle, and I think, yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll ask them afterwards, right? But thank you for all your thoughts, and it's important for us also as a new art fund to be inspired and get this opportunity to hear what you're doing. You know, you've been doing this for many, many, many years, and it's so thank you for your thought.
We have a couple of minutes left. Maria had a comment, and then Odile.
Yeah, because I kind of also, through these brilliant comments from all of the panelists, I also kind of want to go back to kind of the core of why it is structured the way it is, and why that's a problem. And I kind of also want to point out that, you know, I love the Arts Council. It's the only structure we have for funding. And the people working there, they have the best intentions and they do a fabulous job. But they do reflect the society. They reflect the ongoing discourse. And the thing is, as I said, when there is not an ongoing discourse on decolonization, and not also, and neither on, you know, these core concepts that the Arts Council work from or have derived from in a way, which is like professionalism, expertise, excellence, artistic freedom, and so on and so forth. As long as you don't have a kind of living discourse and discussion reflection within the arts field and art communities also, and in the society, the arts councils won't change in a way, because they are doing a great job reflecting the society they are you know, set to serve. So I think, you know, we kind of have to go back to also facilitating a broader discourse on how did and why did we structure things this way, and what are kind of the core concepts that we are working with. And I also just want to mention briefly, because there's a very big difference between Scandinavia and Canada, and it's important in this context. Veronica mentioned it briefly, but for the indigenous people of Scandinavia, the Samis, the money for funding the arts is allocated to the Sami parliaments, because we have had a very different process, and we have a different governing model where the Sami parliaments get funding to strengthen and facilitate development in the Sami arts field. But I mean, their budgets are so immensely small. So, and just to put it in perspective, since we're here in Canada, the Norwegian Arts Fund is approximately 100 million euros. And as far as I know, the Sami Parliament's cultural fund is like 1.7 million euros or something like that altogether. And also, just to mention a last thing, the Norwegian Arts Fund, the $100 million euros, is approximately 7% of the total cultural budget. The rest goes to the institutions. So the panel we had yesterday on decolonizing institutions is like entangled in this whole conversation. We can't see the independent art field as one thing and then the institutions as a different thing, and we can't work on decolonizing the arts councils and the independent art field discourse when we're not talking about the institutions. So this is so complex, so many questions to discuss, and so few minutes to do so.
I just wanted to kind of really just say that we've been doing assessments with no artistic discipline, and it's working. So try it. Try it, and you will see it's working. Having people from different regions, having people from different backgrounds. There was even an elder on a committee, on an assessment committee. And there are projects of capacity development, dance, presenters, there are collaborations. The projects are so diverse, and they are being assessed by a diverse set of people. So I just want to encourage everybody to just dive and, and you will see the results are there. It's going to happen naturally. So that's something I wanted to say about the silos of the disciplines and how powerful it is when you start breaking them. And it just, results happen, and that's the power of action. The other silos that I think is important also in terms of Indigenous arts is the silos between art, culture, tourism, education, health. So that's our side, working with our government partners. How do we break those silos? Because the Indigenous art practice is being funded by all of those departments. But we're not having conversations on how do we do that. So we're leaving them jumping the hoops into all of that when we, on this side, could maybe work on better partnering. And the other thing I also mentioned earlier, and I wanted to say it because I talked about the difficulty of representation because we're such a large. I think where we're going now at Canada Council is that we recognize that it's not going to be done in Ottawa. It's going to be transferred to the regions. We are going to co-create, co-design, and co-deliver the funds. So trusting, organizations that are in the lands, in the areas, and making sure that they have the tools, the resources, and we give them that trust of co-delivering the funds and determining their priorities and their criteria. And we have just today signed an agreement with the Yukon government to co-deliver for the Yukon, the 14 Indigenous communities of the Yukon, with the Yukon government. So I think that that's great, and we're continuing these partnerships. So it's all about creating those partnerships that have the relationship, because we know our mandate is to support the Indigenous artists. We need to build and work with the people that have the relationship, and not try to hold it all on into our little centered office. It's to trust the people that have those relationships and give them the power, the authority, and the resources to deliver appropriately. So that's the next step. It's really decentralizing the funds and bringing them to organizations that have those relationships and that can build those feedback, those, it's all about reciprocity. It's empowering, regional structures, Indigenous structures, and getting the ability to make it happen. So it's really, really, for me, about letting go, but also encouraging you to let go of the disciplines, and results are going to be powerful.
Woo. I know we are on overtime and coffee is served, but I need to give just a closing comments from Veronica and Anna. So please, be brief.
I think for my part, Sweden, there are a few things that are crucial. Of course, we need to reach out. We need to get more applications from Sami artists and from the national minority artists. We need to break down the silos, of course. But I think all of that is superficial if we don't start to talk about the decolonization process. And that's been one of the really important things for me to learn during this summit. We can work with the superficial, the silos, but if we don't understand the concept of decolonization, I don't think we will make it a thorough process. So that's what I'm taking with me from this summit.
I just wanted to say that another thing that has nothing to do with that, but with decolonizing, and also giving opportunities to actually do collaborations. You said collaborations with people that are close to your heart. And for instance, we had a meeting, I'm not gonna say it, but we had an interesting meeting 2 days ago with some of these people also, and talking about how can we make collaborations and possibilities for funding that like for us, don't go through Scandinavia. If we want to cooperate and make cultural projects together with Inuit that are our own people, but we have very strong borders when it comes to the countries that we are part of, and that makes it very difficult. So often you have to go, like Greenlandic artists have to go through Scandinavia, through Denmark to actually get funds to cooperate with someone who is just so close to you. So I'm very happy that we had a meeting 2 days ago, and I'm very hopeful that we can actually start to like make a less complex and more direct bridge, cultural bridge to do this, because we have the projects, we have the connections, we know each other, but to create the possibilities, and it will be amazing, I'm sure. Susanne, who is the director of the Greenlandic Theatre, like she says, the funding is in the Nordic countries, but the heart is with our Indigenous and Inuit families. So I really hope that this is a starting point for that.
And my 5 cents worth of input here in the last minute is that I've been all ears, and I continue being all ears here in these discussions, and thank you very much for all the input that you've given for these discussions, and I think I've learned a lot by being here.
Because we started 15 past, so we have some more minutes. No, I just want to say also, in the spirit of this Arctic Art Summit, I think one of the things that I really hope we can take with us from this conference and this gathering is actually establishing collaboration between the arts councils in the Arctic, so that we can work together on these questions and learn from each other. And I think especially for us in Scandinavia, we need to learn from Canada, and we want to work with Greenland, and so on and so forth. So I think that would be such a strengthening collaboration and structure for the future, and I hope that we will continue this conversation into the future, because we have to.
And just, the title of the panel was In Our Hands, and I think what I take with me and what I hope you take with you is that it's also in your hands. It isn't only the people here. In order for this to happen, as Maria said, there needs to be push on all fronts, whether you're an artist or whether you're a cultural worker or an institutional museum. We need to push from many, many sides. So I think it is a common, a collective responsibility. Some, of course, have more access to changing things than others. But so I really hope we can continue this conversation over coffee. But first, let me give a big hand, help me to give a hand to the speakers. And let's continue talking and changing things. Thanks.